A man asked him, "Where were you on the night of June 17th?" "I was in the graveyard," Tom answered. "Did you see any people there?" the man asked. "Yes, Injun Joe, the doctor, and Muff Potter were there. They didn't see me because I was behind some big trees." "What did you see?" the man asked. "Injun Joe and the doctor talked angrily," Tom answered. "Then Injun Joe killed the doctor with his knife. Muff Potter didn't do it." The people at the trial were surprised. Injun Joe quickly went out of the building. Tom and Huck were very afraid. Tom said, "Now Injun Joe knows about us. He can kill us, too." Many people wanted to hear about the boy's adventure in the graveyard. Tom liked talking about it. He was happy, too, because he helped Muff Potter. But he didn't sleep well because he was afraid of Injun Joe. Chapter 7. Injun Joe's Treasure. One Saturday afternoon, Tom wanted to have an adventure because he didn't want to think about Injun Joe. He went to Huck and said, "I'm going to look for treasure. Do you want to come with me?" Huck always liked an adventure. "Oh, yes," he said. "Where can we look?" "Let's start looking in the old house near Mrs. Douglas's house. Old houses are good places for treasure," Tom answered. The boys went to the old house. They wanted to look at every room. First they went into the kitchen, and then they went into the bedroom. Suddenly, two men came into the kitchen, Injun Joe and his friend. The boys were afraid and stayed in the bedroom very quietly. Injun Joe walked across the kitchen. "We can put our money here," he said to his friend. He started to dig under the floor with his knife. "What's this?" Injun Joe said. "I'm going to get it out." There was a big box under the floor. He opened it with his knife. There was a lot of money in the box. "Look at that money," his friend said. "Let's go now. We can come back and get it tomorrow." "No," Injun Joe said. "We're going to take it with us now. We can take it to that place. You know, the place under the cross." Then the men went out of the house. Injun Joe talked quietly to his friend. The boys listened and were afraid. Tom said, "Did you hear that? He wants to kill us." They went out of the house quietly and went home. The boys were afraid of Injun Joe, but they wanted to find his treasure. They watched his house every night, but they didn't see Injun Joe or his treasure. Chapter 8. Becky's Adventure Day. In August, Becky's family came back from their vacation. Tom was very happy, and he didn't think about Injun Joe's treasure. Becky's Adventure Day was Saturday. Her mother said, "You can sleep at Susie Harper's house after your adventure." "Good," Becky said. Becky and her friends went on the river on a big boat. The boat went down the river and across it. Then it stopped. The children went out of the boat and played games near the river. In the afternoon, one boy asked, "Who wants to go to the big cave?" The children went to the cave. It was dark and cold there, but they played games. In the evening, they went back to the boat and went home. Sunday morning, Becky's mother and Aunt Polly talked to Mrs. Harper at church. Becky's mother asked, "Where's my Becky? Did she sleep at your house?" "No, she didn't," Mrs. Harper answered. "I didn't see her." Aunt Polly said, "My Tom didn't come home. Did he stay at your house?" "No, he didn't," Mrs. Harper answered. Then Aunt Polly and Becky's mother asked the children, "Did Tom and Becky come home? Did you see them on the boat?" The children answered, "No, we didn't see them, but it was dark." Then a boy said, "Maybe they're in the cave." 200 men looked for Tom and Becky in the cave. They looked for 3 days, but they didn't find them. People in the town were very sad. Chapter 9. Huck's Adventure. Huck didn't go on Becky's adventure. He stayed home and watched Injun Joe's house that night. At 11 o'clock, Injun Joe and his friend came out and walked down the street. There was a box in his friend's hands. Huck said quietly, "Maybe that's the treasure box." He went after the 2 men. They walked to Mrs. Douglas's house and stopped in her yard. Huck stayed behind some small trees. The men talked, and Huck listened to them. Injun Joe was angry. "I want to kill her," he said to his friend. "Mr. Douglas was bad to me. He's dead now, but I remember." "There are a lot of lights in the house. Maybe her friends are visiting," Injun Joe's friend said. "We can come back tomorrow." "No," Injun Joe said. "Let's wait now." Huck liked Mrs. Douglas because she was always good to him. He wanted to help her. He quietly walked away, and then he started to run to Mr. Jones's house. Mr. Jones opened the door. "What do you want?" he asked Huck. "Injun Joe and his friend are in Mrs. Douglas's yard," Huck said. "They want to kill her. Can you go there and help Mrs. Douglas?" "Yes, my sons and I can go there," Mr. Jones answered. "You can go home." In the morning, Huck went back to Mr. Jones's house. "How's Mrs. Douglas?" he asked. "She's okay," Mr. Jones answered. "The men went away because we arrived." "Good," Huck said, but he was afraid of Injun Joe. "Please don't say my name to Mrs. Douglas." Mr. Jones looked at him, and then he said, "You aren't well. Go and sleep in my bedroom. Later, Mrs. Douglas visited Mr. Jones. "You helped me yesterday night. Thank you," she said. "You're a good man." Mr. Jones said, "We didn't know about the men in your yard. A boy was there and he wanted to help you. He came here, but I can't say his name." Mr. Jones and Mrs. Douglas went to church. People there talked about Tom and Becky. Mr. Jones and his sons went to the cave with the men. But on Monday morning they went home. Huck was in bed and was very sick. The men went back to the cave, but Mrs. Douglas stayed with Huck. Chapter 10. In the Cave. Saturday, Tom and Becky walked and played in the cave. Then they stopped near some water. "What time is it?" Becky asked. "I don't know," Tom said. "Let's go back now." The two children walked and walked, but they didn't find the door to the cave. Becky was afraid. She wanted to sit down and eat. "Maybe they're looking for us now," she said. "Here's some food," Tom said. "Eat this and wait here. I'm going to look for the door." Tom walked and walked, but he didn't find the cave door. Suddenly, there was a man near him. Tom was afraid, but he stayed quiet. He looked at the man. It was Injun Joe. Tom was very afraid, and he made a noise. Injun Joe went away quickly. Tom went back to Becky, but he didn't talk to her about Injun Joe. They were in the cave for 3 days. Tuesday, Becky didn't want to walk. Again Tom said, "Stay here. I'm going to look for the door." This time he went to a new place. There was a light there. He went to the light. It came from a small door in the cave. Tom went out of the cave. Then he went back to Becky. "Come with me," he said. "We can go out of the cave now." Tom and Becky went out of the cave. They were very happy. They went to the river and waited there. Some men in a small boat came to them. Tom said, "We want to go home. Can you help us?" The men answered, "Yes, we can take you home." Tom and Becky went in the boat with the men. They arrived home very late Tuesday night, and people in the town were very happy. Tom talked all night about their adventure in the cave. Chapter 11. In the Cave Again. Tom and Becky stayed home for many days. Then, 2 weeks after their adventure, Tom visited Becky and talked to her father. Mr. Thatcher said, "You're a very good boy, Tom. You helped Becky in the cave. Thank you. People can't go into it now because it has a new big door. But Injun Joe's living in the cave," Tom said. Some men went down the river to the cave. Tom went with them. They opened the new door. Injun Joe was there, but he was dead. Tom wanted to talk to Huck, Later in the week, he went to Mr. Jones's house. The two boys talked about their adventures. "The money isn't in Injun Joe's house," Tom said. "It's in the cave." "I know, because Injun Joe was there. Let's get it." Huck was afraid. "But maybe we can't find it." "I can find it again," Tom said. "I know about a small door at the back of the cave." Becky and I came out there. "We can go in that door, and I can find Injun Joe's treasure." "Okay," Huck said. "Let's go today." That afternoon, the boys went in a small boat to the back of the cave. Tom walked first, and Huck went after him. They walked and walked. Then Tom said, "This is the right place. Injun Joe was here." The boys looked for a good place for treasure. Suddenly, Tom said, "Look, there's a cross. Injun Joe said, 'Under the cross.' Let's look there." The boys went to the place with the cross. Tom said, "I'm going to dig here with my knife." "Look, it's the treasure box." "Let's get it out now. The treasure's ours." "This box is very heavy," Huck said. "We can't take it with us." "I have some small bags," Tom said. "We can put the money in them and take it home." The boys went out of the cave with the money. Chapter 12. At Mrs. Douglas's house. Tom said, "Let's take the money to the old house near Mrs. Douglas's house. That's a good place for it." They started to walk to the old house. Mr. Jones was in Mrs. Douglas's yard. He called to the boys. "A lot of people are waiting for you." "Come with me," he said. They went into Mrs. Douglas's house. "Hello, boys," Mrs. Douglas said. "Come with me." Tom and Huck went with her to a bedroom. There were new shirts and jeans on the bed. "Wash your hands and faces and put on these shirts and jeans," Mrs. Douglas said. "Then come to the big room." The boys went to the room. A lot of people were there. Mrs. Douglas said, "First, I want to say thank you to Mr. Jones and his sons. They helped me. They're very good people." "Huck helped too," Mr. Jones said. "Thank you too, Huck," Mrs. Douglas said. "You're a good boy, and I like you. I want to give you a home and some money." "But Huck has a lot of money," Tom said. He went to the bedroom and came back with the bags of money. "We have this money from the cave. There's a lot of money in them, and it's ours now." There was $12,000 in the bags. The people were very surprised. They asked about the boys' adventure. Chapter 13. Huck's New Home. Huck lived in the big house with Mrs. Douglas. He was a new person. He washed every day, and he went to school and church. But he wasn't happy. He stayed there for 3 weeks, and then he ran away. Tom went to Huck. "Why did you run away?" Huck answered, "Mrs. Douglas is a good woman. I like her, but I can't live with her. I don't like washing every day, and I don't like going to school and church. I don't want to have a lot of money, but I want to be your friend, okay?" "No," Tom said. "I can't be your friend because the boys at school don't want to play with you. We're thinking about a lot of new adventures. Please live with Mrs. Douglas and come to school. Then the boys at school can play with you." "I want to be your friend," Huck said, "and I want to have adventures with you and the boys at school. Maybe I can live with Mrs. Douglas. I don't know, but I'm going to try it again for a month." "Good," Tom said. "The boys are meeting later, at 12 o'clock at night. You can come too." "Good," Huck said.